The idea for Project Nightingale arrived not in a flash of genius, but as a slow rising tide. For 6 months, it was my secret. A clandestine love affair conducted in the quiet hours before my colleagues arrived and in the flickering blue light of my laptop long after my fiancé had gone to sleep. At my desk at Sterling Galt, a monolithic financial services corporation, I was Anya Sharma, a junior data analyst. A good one, a reliable one. A face in the sea of open-plan desks on the 32nd floor. But in my secret world of password-protected folders and encrypted spreadsheets, I was an architect. I was building the future. As Sterling Galt had a problem. A massive, systemic, multi-million-dollar problem with client retention in our wealth management division. We were losing our younger clients, the heirs and heiresses, the tech entrepreneurs, to smaller, more agile fintech startups. We were a dinosaur and we were bleeding. Everyone knew it, but no one knew what to do about it. The corporate inertia was just too great. Project Nightingale was my answer. It was a predictive analytics platform powered by a machine learning algorithm I had designed myself. It would analyze client behavior, market trends, and even social sentiment to identify at-risk accounts before they decided to leave. It would then recommend a bespoke retention strategy tailored to each individual client. It was proactive, not reactive. It was smart. It was, I knew with a certainty that hummed in my bones, a game changer. It was my ticket out of the analyst pool. It was my masterpiece. I poured everything I had into it. I taught myself 2 new coding languages. I spent weekends building the predictive models, my apartment walls covered in whiteboards filled with complex equations. I crafted a 60-page proposal complete with market analysis, a 5-year implementation roadmap, and a conservative ROI projection that was still staggering. The final document was beautiful, a fortress of logic and data. It was undeniable. My boss was Marcus Thorne, the Senior Vice President of Strategic Development. Marcus was a corporate rock star. He was handsome, charismatic, and had a smile that could charm a regulator. He was a master of the boardroom, a king of the PowerPoint presentation. He had risen through the ranks not by creating anything, but by flawlessly executing the ideas of others. I was young and naive enough to believe that was a good thing. I thought he was the perfect person to champion my idea. I requested a one-on-one meeting. I walked into his glass-walled office, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. I laid it all out for him. I walked him through the data, the algorithm, the roadmap. I spoke with a passion and clarity I didn't know I possessed. I watched his face closely as he clicked through my presentation, his expression unreadable. When I finished, I was breathless, my hopes so bright it felt like a physical light. In the room. He leaned back in his expensive leather chair, steepling his fingers. He was silent for a long moment. "Impressive, Anya," he said finally, his voice smooth as silk. "Very thorough." He tapped a manicured finger on my printed proposal. "It's a clever thought starter. A lot of good data here." "A thought starter?" My heart faltered. "But," he continued with an air of gentle paternalistic wisdom, "the timing is off. We're in the middle of a major platform migration. The board is focused on cost-cutting. An initiative of this scale? It's just not feasible right now." He slid the proposal back across the desk to me. "Keep up the good work. Though, this is the kind of outside-the-box thinking I like to see." He smiled that dazzling smile. The meeting was over. I walked back to my desk in a daze, crushed. It felt like I had offered him a bar of solid gold and he had complimented its interesting color before handing it back. But he was the SVP. He knew the political landscape of the company. If he said the timing was wrong, it was wrong. Disappointed but undeterred, I archived the Project Nightingale files. I would wait. My idea was too good to die. I would focus on my work and wait for a better opportunity. 3 weeks later, an email from the CEO landed in every employee's inbox. The subject line was, announcing a bold new future, the Apex Initiative. My blood ran cold. I clicked it open. The email was a gushing announcement about a revolutionary new platform that would leverage synergistic data-driven paradigms to proactively enhance client relationships. It was corporate jargon salad, but the meaning was clear. It was Project Nightingale. The email went on to praise the visionary leadership of the man who had developed this groundbreaking strategy from the ground up. The man who would be leading the new division, Marcus Thorne. The world tilted on its axis. I read the email 3 times, the words blurring through a haze of disbelief. He hadn't just stolen my idea. He had stolen my language, my data, my 5-year roadmap. He had taken my soul's work, slapped a bland corporate name on it, and presented it as his own. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of my desk. Later that day, there was a company-wide town hall. Marcus took the stage to a round of applause. He was in his element, radiating confidence and charm. Behind him, on a massive screen, were my slides. The ones I had spent 100 hours designing. He was clicking through my work, speaking my words, accepting the adulation of the crowd for a vision he had dismissed just weeks before. It was the most surreal, most violating experience of my life. It was like watching someone else move into your house, wear your clothes, and accept compliments on how beautifully they had decorated. I waited until the crowd of backslappers and well-wishers around him had thinned. I walked up to him, my body trembling with a rage so pure it felt like a fever. "Marcus," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. He turned, his smile faltering for a microsecond when he saw my face. "Anya, great day, isn't it? A big win for the team. I'd like to talk to you about the Apex initiative," I said. "In your office." He sighed, the mask of charm dropping to reveal a flicker of irritation. "Fine." In his office, with the door closed, I confronted him. "You stole my project," I said, the words feeling small and inadequate to describe the scale of his theft. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He looked amused. "Anya, let's be realistic," he said, sitting on the edge of his desk. "Your little project was a nice idea. A thought starter, like I said, but it was raw, it was academic. I took that raw concept and I, along with my senior team, put in the real work. We made it strategic. We made it viable. We made it Apex." I stared at him speechless. The audacity of the gaslighting was breathtaking. "You're being emotional," he continued, his voice softening into that same patronizing tone from our meeting. "You need to learn to be a team player. Good ideas are a dime a dozen. Execution is what matters. This is a major corporate initiative now. It's bigger than you. It's bigger than me." He paused, then delivered the final crushing blow. "But I haven't forgotten your contribution. I was going to talk to you next week. I'm putting together the Apex team and I'm reserving a spot for you, a junior analyst role. It will be a fantastic learning opportunity for you to see how a project of this scale is really managed. A great chance to grow." He was offering me a job as a junior cog in the machine he had built from my stolen blueprints. The cruelty and the condescension were so profound I felt dizzy. "Think about it," he said, walking to the door and opening it. "It's a great opportunity. But a word of advice, Anya, don't go around making waves. Complaining that someone stole your idea is a bad look. It makes you seem naive and not collaborative. It can be a real career killer." He smiled the empty, brilliant smile. "I'll expect your decision on Monday." I spent the weekend in a fog of despair and fury. He had me trapped. If I went to HR, it would be my word against a popular, powerful SVP. They would launch a long, painful investigation that would quietly conclude with an inconclusive finding. Marcus would face no consequences, and I would be branded for life as a disgruntled troublemaker. If I accepted his insulting offer, I would have to sit there every day and watch him be celebrated for my work, a daily ritual of humiliation. If I quit, he would win completely. I would walk away with nothing but a broken spirit. On Saturday night, unable to sleep, I opened my laptop. I navigated to the archived Project Nightingale folder. I opened the original proposal, the one I printed for him. I looked at the file properties. Created March 12th, last modified March 14th. I opened the raw data files, the spreadsheets, the presentation decks, all of them. Had creation dates, version histories, metadata. A complete, unalterable digital fingerprint of my work, my process, my ownership. The proof was absolute. It was all there. And it was all mine. The despair began to recede. The fury remained, but it was no longer a hot, chaotic mess. It was cooling, hardening into something sharp and clear, a weapon. Marcus had made a critical mistake. He had assumed I would play by the established rules of the corporate game, a game he had mastered, a game designed to protect men like him. He thought my only options were HR or surrender. He never imagined I would refuse to play the game at all. He never imagined I would choose to burn the whole damn board. The company's annual board of directors retreat was the following week in Napa Valley. It was the most important event on the corporate calendar. Marcus was scheduled to deliver the keynote address on the final day, presenting the Apex initiative to the board, the CEO, and the entire C-suite. It was to be his coronation. The night before his keynote, I sat at my kitchen table. It was 10 p.m. I drafted a new email. I kept it short, professional, and devastatingly simple. I found the distribution list for the board of directors in the company's internal directory. I added every single one of them. I added the CEO, the COO, the CFO, the chief counsel. Every powerful name I could find. The subject line was innocuous, supporting documentation for Apex Initiative. The body of the email was just 3 sentences. Dear board members and executive leadership, in advance of tomorrow's keynote presentation on the Apex Initiative, I wanted to provide the original source materials for your review. Attached you will find the complete Project Nightingale files, including all preliminary research, data models, and the original proposal with its full version history. I am incredibly excited about this initiative and look forward to contributing to its success. Sincerely, Anya Sharma, Junior Data Analyst. Sterling Galt. I created a single zip file named project_nightingale_source_files. It contained everything. Every spreadsheet. Every presentation. Every document, gleaming with metadata and timestamps that proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that this entire initiative was born on my laptop. Months before Marcus Thorne ever spoke its name, I attached the file. My hand trembled as my cursor hovered over the send button. This was it. There was no coming back from this. I took a deep breath, and I clicked. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there watching the sunrise, a strange sense of calm washing over me. I had no idea what would happen, but I had taken my power back. The outcome was no longer in Marcus's hands. It was in mine. The next day, I went into the office and packed my personal belongings into a small box. I fully expected to be summoned by security and walked out of the building by lunchtime. The morning passed in an eerie silence. No one spoke. To me, people avoided my gaze. The air was thick with tension. Then, at 11:30 a.m., an email landed in my inbox. The sender was Helen Dubois, the CEO's executive assistant. The subject was meeting request. The body was simple. Anya, Miss Caldwell would like to see you in her office on the 50th floor immediately. This was it. With my box in my hands, I took the elevator up to the executive suites. The 50th floor was a different world, of thick carpets, original art on the walls, a hushed, reverent silence. Helen Dubois led me into the CEO's corner office. Elizabeth Caldwell was a formidable woman in her 60s who had run Sterling Galt with an iron fist for a decade. She was standing by her window, looking out over the city. She turned to face me. Her expression was not angry. It was a complex mixture of stone-cold fury, deep frustration, and a sliver of something that looked unnervingly like respect. Sit down, Anya, she said, her voice quiet. I sat. She remained standing. I spent my morning in Napa on a conference call with a board of directors that was, to put it mildly, apoplectic. They had your email. They had your files. They had seen the timestamps. And then they had to sit there while Marcus Thorne walked in, completely unaware, and prepared to give a keynote presentation on his great idea. She paused, letting the image hang in the air. I have never, in my 30-year career, witnessed a public execution so swift and so brutal. Marcus Thorne's employment with Sterling Galt was terminated before he even reached the podium. His career in this industry is over. He is a ghost. She walked over to her desk and sat down, her eyes fixed on me. You exposed a rot in my senior leadership. You revealed a man I trusted to be a fraud. And for that, this company owes you a debt of gratitude. However, she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a steely whisper. The way you did it was an act of breathtaking corporate terrorism. You bypassed every single channel, every protocol, every semblance of process. You held a gun to your boss's head in a room full of the most powerful people in our world. You terrify me, Miss Sharma. I met her gaze. He left me no other option, I said quietly. The system is designed to protect men like him from women like me, so I chose not to use it. A long silence stretched between. U.S. Elizabeth Caldwell studied my face, her expression unreadable. Finally, a slow, thin smile touched her lips. No, she said. I suppose you didn't. She leaned back in her chair. The Apex Initiative, as it was called, is now without a leader. But the project itself, your Project Nightingale, is, as you correctly assessed, brilliant. The board has approved its full funding, effective immediately. She paused. And it needs a director. Someone who knows it better than anyone else. Someone with the vision to see it through and the ruthlessness to protect it. She stood up and extended her hand. The job is yours if you want it. Director of Strategic Analytics. You'll report directly to me. Welcome to the 50th floor, Miss Sharma. I stared at her outstretched hand, then at the box and my belongings on the floor. I had come up here expecting to be fired. I was being offered the keys to the kingdom. I stood up, and for the first time, I felt the full dizzying power of what I had done. I hadn't just gotten revenge. I had won. I had taken the system that was designed to crush me, and I had broken it to my will. I shook her hand. Her grip was like steel. The handshake was the end of one war and the beginning of another. The old war had been a simple, brutal affair of theft and revenge. This new one was quieter and more complex. It was a war of legitimacy. I had won the throne, but now I had to prove I deserved to rule. Moving into Marcus Thorne's old office was a surreal experience. It was a corner office on the 50th floor, with a view that stretched all the way to the horizon. The furniture was expensive and personal. A ghost of his cologne seemed to linger in the air. For the first few days, I felt like an imposter, a child playing dress-up in her father's suit. The other senior executives on the floor treated me with a strange mixture of professional courtesy and extreme caution. They would smile in the hallway, but their eyes were wary. I wasn't one of them. I was the corporate terrorist. The girl who had vaporized a senior vice president with a single email. They didn't know whether to fear me or dismiss me as a one-hit wonder. My first meeting with my new team was a study in tension. They were a collection of data scientists, developers, and project managers handpicked by Elizabeth Caldwell from various departments. And in a move I knew was a deliberate test, she had assigned two of Marcus's former senior managers to my team. And one of them, a man in his 50s named Gary, had a look of undisguised resentment on his face. He had been Marcus's right hand man, and he now had to report to a 20-something analyst who had gotten his boss fired. I stood at the head of the conference table, the same table where Marcus had probably pitched his stolen ideas 100 times. I didn't talk about my vision. I didn't talk about leadership. I opened the original Project Nightingale code on the main screen. This is the core algorithm, I said, my voice steady. It's elegant, but it's not efficient. Enough for a full-scale deployment. Our first task is to stress test it, break it, and rebuild it 10 times better. I don't care about titles. I care about the work. The best idea in this room will always win. I spent the next few weeks in the trenches with them. I didn't just direct, I coded, I ran data models. I worked 18-hour days, just as I had when Nightingale was my secret project. I wanted to show them I wasn't just an idea person. I was a builder. Some of the younger developers and analysts, the ones who had been toiling in obscurity like me, responded immediately. They were excited by the project, by the chance to work on something truly innovative. They saw me as one of them. Gary, however, remained a problem. He was a master of subtle sabotage. He would question my technical decisions in front of the whole team, framing his challenges as just playing devil's advocate. He would forget to pass on crucial information from other departments. He was trying to undermine my authority, to create a narrative that I was in over my head. I knew a direct confrontation would be a mistake. It would look like I was insecure. I had to beat him. At his own game, not with power, but with competence. The moment came during a major architecture review. We were deciding on the database structure for the platform. I had proposed a non-relational model, which was better for handling the massive, unstructured datasets our algorithm would. be using, Gary argued for a traditional relational database, the kind Sterling Gold had used for 30 years. It's the corporate standard, Anya, he said, his tone condescending. It's reliable. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here with some new trendy technology. Instead of arguing, I put a data simulation on the screen. You're right, Gary, I said calmly. The relational model is reliable. Here is a simulation of it processing 1 day's worth of our projected data flow. We watched as the progress bar on the screen crawled at a snail's pace. As you can see, the query time is over 18 minutes. The platform would be unusable. Then I switched to another screen. This is the same simulation, running on the non-relational model I've proposed. The progress bar blazed across the screen in under 5 seconds. Query time is 4.7 seconds. The data speaks for itself. I didn't look at Gary. I looked at the rest of the team. The lead developer, a brilliant woman named Kenna, just nodded slowly, a look of profound respect in her eyes. In that moment, the battle for the team's loyalty was over. I had won not by pulling rank, but by being the smartest person in the room. Gary never openly challenged me again. My relationship with Elizabeth Caldwell was a delicate dance. She was my protector, but she was also my greatest skeptic. She called me to her office once a week for a progress report. These meetings were intense, grilling sessions. She dissected every decision, questioned every assumption. She was testing me, pushing me, waiting for me to fail. You have to understand something, Anya, she told me during one of these meetings, her gaze like a physical force. The members of that board don't like you. They respect your idea, but they are terrified of your methods. You are a disruption. And this company, by its very nature, abhors disruption. Your only protection is results. Your only currency is success. If Project Nightingale succeeds, you will be a visionary. If it fails, you will be nothing but a cautionary tale. Do you understand? Yes, Miss Caldwell, I said. Good, she replied. Now show me the latest data. The pressure was immense, but I thrived on it. This was what I had always wanted, to have my work matter, to be judged on the merit of my results. 3 months after I took over, we launched the internal beta of the Nightingale platform. We ran it on a test group of 500 high-value accounts. The results were astonishing. The platform correctly identified 94% of the clients who were at high risk of leaving, and the tailored retention strategies it recommended had a 78% success rate. It was working even better than my most optimistic projections. The time had come for my own presentation to the board. It was in the same Napa Valley Conference Center where Marcus had met his end. As I walked to the podium, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. But this time, I wasn't the ghost in the machine. I was the one in control of the presentation. The same faces stared back at me, but their expressions were different. The skepticism was still there, but now it was mixed with a grudging curiosity. I didn't talk about paradigms or synergies. I talked about data, results, and profit. I showed them the beta test numbers. I showed them a clear, aggressive, and achievable plan for a full company-wide rollout within 9 months. I showed them a new P&L projection that forecasted Nightingale would not just stop the financial bleeding, but would become the single largest driver of new revenue within 3 years. When I finished, the room was silent. I braced myself for a grilling. Instead, the chairman of the board, a formidable old man who rarely spoke, simply nodded. Impressive, Miss Sharma, he said, very impressive. From across the room, I caught Elizabeth Caldwell's eye. For the first time, I saw her give a genuine, unambiguous smile. It was small, but it was a victory more satisfying than any line of code. That night, I stood on the balcony of my hotel room, looking out at the rolling hills of the vineyard. Just a few months ago, I had been a junior analyst, packing my desk in anticipation of being fired. Now I was a director, one of the youngest in the company's history, in charge of a 9-figure project. I had exposed a villain and taken his place. But I realized, standing there in the cool of my air, that my victory was no longer about Marcus. The satisfaction I felt wasn't from his downfall, but from my own ascent. It wasn't about revenge. It was about creation. I had a good idea, but an idea without power is just a whisper in the wind. Now I had power. And I was ready to make my whisper roar. The first 6 months on the 50th floor were a lesson in translation. I had to learn how to translate my technical vision into a language that the board of directors, a group of former bankers and legacy heirs, could understand: profit, market share, and dominance. I had to translate my quiet, data-driven authority into a leadership style that could inspire a team still wary of my meteoric and frankly brutal ascent. Most of all, I had to translate the terrified, ambitious junior analyst I had been into the powerful, decisive director I now was. My office, once Marcus Thorne's sterile monument to corporate ambition, slowly became my own. I replaced the generic abstract art with framed patent diagrams and data visualizations that were, to me, beautiful. My team, once a collection of skeptical strangers, had coalesced around the work. The project was the great unifier. Project Nightingale was so undeniably brilliant, so compelling in its logic, that it eclipsed the drama of its origins. Gary, Marcus's resentful former lieutenant, had requested a transfer after I'd publicly and decisively dismantled his technical challenge. He was replaced by Kenna, the sharp lead developer who had backed my play, and she became my trusted second in command. Our days were a frantic, exhilarating rhythm of code sprints, beta tests, and strategy sessions. We were building something revolutionary, and the energy on the floor was palpable. My relationship with Elizabeth Caldwell, the CEO, settled into a strange and powerful groove. It wasn't mentorship, not in the warm, traditional sense. It was more like being the apprentice to a master blacksmith. She was tough, demanding, and constantly testing the temper of my steel. But I knew she was also forging me into a stronger weapon. Never get comfortable, Anya, she told me one afternoon after I presented a flawless progress report. Success makes people complacent. The moment you believe you've won is the moment you become a target. At the time, I thought she was just speaking in corporate metaphors. I didn't realize she was giving me a literal warning. I didn't realize the wolves were already circling. The first tremor was almost imperceptible. It came a week after Sterling Galt's stellar quarterly earnings report. In the call with investors, Elizabeth had, for the first time, in the call with investors, Elizabeth had, for the first time, publicly mentioned the successful internal trials of a next-generation proprietary analytics platform that was projected to significantly reduce client churn. She never said the name Nightingale, but the message to our competitors was clear. Sterling Galt had a secret weapon. Our stock jumped 7%. A few days later, our chief information security officer, a perpetually caffeinated man named David, sent a routine company-wide bulletin about a minor uptick in phishing attempts. Standard procedure. But later that day, he sent a follow-up email just to me and Elizabeth. It detailed a series of sophisticated but unsuccessful probes against our R&D servers, the very servers where the Nightingale source code was housed. The attacks were routed through a complex network of proxy servers, bouncing from Eastern Europe to South America, making them virtually untraceable. It's probably just industrial espionage from one of our smaller rivals, David wrote in the email. They're trying to see what we're building. The firewall's held. Nothing to worry about. Elizabeth called me into her office. She stood by the window, her back to me, looking out at the city. There's no such thing as a small rival, she said without turning around. Only fast ones and dead ones. Tell me about your team's security protocols. I walked her through them. Our code was on an air-gapped network, our team used multi-factor authentication, and access was strictly on a need-to-know basis. We were secure. I was confident. Confidence is a luxury, Anya, she said, finally turning to face me. Her eyes were like chips of ice. Paranoia is a survival trait. I want you to conduct a full security audit of your team. Everyone, I want to know who has access to what, and I want to know who they're talking to. The request felt like a violation. I trusted my team, but I saw the look on her face. This wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. I had built a team based on trust and a shared vision. Now, Elizabeth was telling me I had to start looking for a traitor in our midst. The audit was a grim, uncomfortable process. I worked with David and the CISO team, reviewing access logs, email communications, everything. It felt like I was spying on my own people. Most of it was clean, predictable. The junior developers accessed the code libraries. The project managers accessed the timelines. Then we got to Gary's replacement. A quiet, unassuming data scientist named Ben. Ben was brilliant but socially awkward. He rarely spoke in meetings but produced flawless work. He was one of the few on the team who had been personally recruited by Marcus Thorne years ago, before I ever started at the company. On the surface, his logs were clean. But David's team found something buried deep in the metadata. Ben had been using an encrypted messaging app on his work terminal, a clear violation of company policy. And he had been running complex search queries on the company's internal financial directory, looking up the salary and bonus information for senior executives, including Marcus Thorne's final compensation package. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was strange. It was a pattern of behavior that didn't fit. Why would a data scientist on the Nightingale project be obsessed with the pay stubs of a disgraced former executive? The answer came from a different direction entirely. Kenna, my second in command, came to my office and closed the door. She looked worried. I don't want to be a snitch, she started, twisting her hands. But I overheard something in the break room. It's about Ben. He's been complaining about money. His mom is sick, a long-term illness, and his insurance isn't covering all of it. He's in a tough spot. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. Motive, opportunity. A man under extreme financial and emotional distress. A man with a pre-existing loyalty to Marcus Thorne. Ben was the perfect target for a recruitment pitch from a competitor. He was our weak point. The competitor, we soon learned, was our most formidable rival, Argent Capital. Through back channels, Elizabeth's sources confirmed that Argent was in a panic over our earnings call. They were desperate to know what our secret weapon was. And we had also learned where Marcus Thorne had landed after being fired. He wasn't in the US anymore. He had taken a senior role at Argent's European headquarters in London. He was perfectly positioned to orchestrate a revenge plot against the company that had ousted him and the woman who had ruined him. We had our suspect. But we had no proof of contact, no proof of espionage. Confronting Ben would just make him deny everything. And the real enemy, Argent Capital, would know we were onto them and simply change tactics. Elizabeth's words echoed in my head. Success makes you a target. I realized we couldn't just play defense. We had to go on the attack. We had to set a trap. I pulled Kenna and David, the CISO, into a secure conference room. I swore them to secrecy. Not even Elizabeth would know the details of this plan. This had to be ours. They think we're a fortress, I said, pacing in front of the whiteboard. They're trying to find a crack in the walls. So we're going to give them one. We're going to build them a beautiful, inviting, unlocked door. And on the other side, we're going to be waiting with a cage. The plan was audacious. We would create a honeypot. A decoy server completely isolated from our real network, but designed to look like a poorly secured development backup. On that server, Kana and her best coders would build a believable, but critically flawed, version of the Nightingale source code. It would be convincing enough to pass a cursory inspection, but it would contain a hidden payload. What kind of payload? David asked, his eyes gleaming with a hacker's excitement. The most vicious piece of tracking malware you can design, I said. I don't just want to know if they steal it. I want to know where it goes. I want to know what server it sits on, what computer opens it. I want to follow the breadcrumbs all the way back to their front door. We also created a series of breadcrumbs for Ben to find. Kenna would have a careless conversation near him about the insecure backup server. We would plant a document in a shared folder detailing the server's IP address, labeled Urgent Decommission. We were leading the horse to water. The question was, would he drink? He drank. 2 days after we set the trap, at 2:17 a.m. on a Thursday morning, the silent alarms on our honeypot server tripped. David called me immediately. We've got him, Anya, he whispered, his voice electric. He's in. He's accessing the decoy folder right now. We watched remotely, our screens mirrored to his activity. We saw his cursor move. We saw him select the zip file labeled Nightingale_source_alpha. We saw him initiate the download to an external encrypted hard drive. It was a clean, undeniable act of corporate espionage. We had everything. The server logs, the screen capture, the security footage of him at his desk in the middle of the night. The next morning, Ben was called into a meeting with Me, David, and a lawyer from our general counsel's office. He walked in looking pale and sleep-deprived. He saw our faces and knew instantly that the game was up. He didn't even try to lie. He collapsed into a chair and confessed everything. The story was as sordid and predictable as we had imagined. His contact was a recruiter for Argent Capital. They had approached him weeks ago, referencing his connection to Marcus Thorne. They knew about his mother's medical bills. They had offered him $250,000 in cash for a copy of the Nightingale source code. The money had already been placed in an offshore account waiting for him to deliver the files. Marcus? He set it all up, Ben stammered, his face buried in his hands. He told them I was the one to approach. He told them I was loyal to him, that I was desperate. The confession was recorded, the evidence compiled. Ben was fired, but Elizabeth, on my recommendation, agreed not to press criminal charges in exchange for his full cooperation. He was a pawn, a victim in his own way. My real target wasn't him. It was the player who had moved him across the board. It was Marcus. And now, thanks to Ben, our little Trojan horse, the flawed Nightingale code with its hidden malware payload was on an encrypted hard drive on its way to Argent Capital's headquarters in London. The trap had been sprung. The hunt was about to begin. The week that followed was one of the most stressful of my life. I had to maintain a perfect facade of normalcy. I led team meetings, reviewed code, and wrote progress reports on the real Project Nightingale, all while a small secret part of my brain was focused on the silent, digital time bomb we had released into the world. Every morning I would get a one-word email from David, dormant. The waiting was a unique form of torture. We knew Argent Capital wouldn't be foolish enough to try and open the files on their main corporate network. They would have an isolated R&D lab, a sandbox environment where they would analyze the code. The question was when. Then, 8 days after Ben's confession, the email from David arrived at 4:32 p.m. It contained a single word, awake. I felt a jolt of pure adrenaline. I grabbed Kenna and we hurried to the secure operations room David had set up. On the main screen was a world map. A single, pulsing red dot glowed brightly over central London. Our malware was phoning home. It had been activated. They're in their sandbox, David said, his fingers flying across a keyboard. The file was opened on a machine inside a sub-network firewalled off from their main servers. They're being careful. He brought up another window. But they're not careful enough. The malware is working. It's already found a vulnerability in their sandbox's OS. I have a backdoor. For the next several hours, we became ghosts in their machine. It was a delicate, terrifying dance. We weren't there to steal or to sabotage. We were there to gather evidence. David, moving with the quiet precision of a bomb disposal expert, navigated their network. He was looking for two things: the location of our stolen honeypot files, and any communication that proved they had orchestrated the theft. Aikina's job was to analyze the code they were running. They're trying to decompile it, she whispered, pointing to a stream of text on her screen. They're good, but they're getting frustrated. They can't figure out why the core algorithm keeps producing garbage data. They think the file was corrupted during the download. The flawed code she had written was doing its job, sending them down a rabbit hole while our malware mapped their network. Then we found it. Tucked away on a project manager's local machine was a folder labeled Project Chimera. Inside was a series of memos. David carefully, silently copied them to our secure server. I opened the first one. It was a preliminary project brief written by the head of Argent's R&D department. It outlined a plan to acquire and reverse engineer a competitor's proprietary analytics platform, codenamed Nightingale. It detailed the plan to use a former Sterling Gold executive, Marcus Thorne, to identify and recruit an internal asset. It named Ben. It laid out the entire conspiracy in cold corporate language. It was the smoking gun. I printed the memo. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a feeling of cold, absolute victory. We had them. This wasn't just proof of a crime. It was a signed confession. I took the file straight to Elizabeth Caldwell's office. It was late, almost 10 p.m., but she was still there. I laid the printed out memo on her desk without a word. She read, her expression hardening with every sentence. When she finished, she looked up at me, and the look in her eyes was no longer just respect. It was the look one apex predator gives another. "You didn't just defend the fortress, Anya," she said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. "You captured their king, their castle, and their battle plans. What do you suggest we do with them?" I had thought about this. We could sue them in civil court. We could use this as leverage to force a merger on our terms. But I knew what Elizabeth would want. She wouldn't want to wound them, she would want to annihilate them. "We don't sue," I said. "We don't negotiate. We hand this entire file Ben's confession, the server logs from the honeypot, and these internal memos from their own network to the Department of Justice and the UK's Serious Fraud Office. This isn't a corporate dispute. It's a federal crime." Elizabeth's thin smile returned. It was terrifying. "Get the files to General Counsel," she said. "I'll make the calls myself." The fallout was a nuclear winter for Argent Capital. The story didn't leak. It was detonated by the federal authorities. 2 weeks later, simultaneous raids were conducted by the FBI at Argent's New York offices and by British authorities at their London headquarters. The news was everywhere. Corporate espionage ring uncovered at Argent Capital. As Sterling Galt, the target of sophisticated cyber theft plot. The head of Argent's R&D department was arrested. Several other executives were indicted, and an international arrest warrant was issued for a key consultant on the project, a former US-based executive named Marcus Thorne. He was last seen in Zurich and was now, for all intents and purposes, a fugitive from justice. He was no longer a ghost in the machine. He was just a ghost on the run. A month later, things had settled into a new kind of normal. Project Nightingale, now more secure than ever, was racing towards its full launch. The company was buzzing with a renewed sense of purpose and pride. I was no longer the girl who had gotten her boss fired. I was the woman who had protected the company from its greatest rival. Elizabeth Caldwell called me to her office. She gestured for me to sit. "The board has approved the creation of a new C-suite position," she said, her tone matter of fact, Chief Innovation Officer, responsible for the development and security of all future proprietary technology. "They've asked me to lead the search." She paused, her eyes locking onto mine. "But I see no need for a search. The job is yours, Anya, if you want it." Chief Innovation Officer, C-suite. It was a position so far beyond what I had ever imagined for myself. It felt like it belonged to a different person. But I wasn't that junior analyst anymore. I had been tested by fire, by betrayal, by corporate warfare, and I was still standing. I was no longer just the architect of Project Nightingale. I was its guardian. I looked at the formidable woman across the desk, the CEO who had seen my potential and my ruthlessness and had decided to cultivate both. "I accept," I said, my voice clear and steady. My assent was complete. But I knew with a certainty that had been forged in the crucible of the last year that this wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning of a much bigger game. And I was finally ready to play. The title Chief Innovation Officer was a shield and a statement. It gave me a place at the table with the most powerful people in the company. It gave me a mandate signed in the blood of Argent Capital's public humiliation to protect and foster the technological future of Sterling Galt. The first year in that role was a whirlwind of building my division, scaling Project Nightingale across our global operations, and establishing a new standard for cybersecurity that made our company a digital fortress. Nightingale was a staggering success. It didn't just stop the client churn. It became a profit center in its own right, allowing us to offer predictive analytics as a premium service. I had delivered. My currency, as Elizabeth Caldwell had predicted, was success, and I'd minted it in droves. The other executives no longer looked at me with fear. They looked at me with the deference they reserved for anyone who could demonstrably affect the bottom line. I had, for all intents and purposes, won the game. But the victory felt incomplete. I had changed my own circumstances, but had I changed the circumstances that created my situation in the first place? The culture of Sterling Galt was still a rigid top-down hierarchy. It was a system that rewarded political maneuvering as much as, if not more than, genuine innovation. I had punched a hole through the ceiling, but the ceiling was still there for everyone else. I had escaped the maze, but I hadn't torn it down. The catalyst for my next, and perhaps final, battle arrived in the form of a file attached to a timid email. It was from a financial analyst on the 16th floor named Maya. I had never met her. The file contained a proposal for a new risk assessment tool for emerging markets. It was brilliant. The statistical modeling was elegant, the market analysis was insightful, and the potential application was enormous. It was a project that could save the company hundreds of millions in bad investments. It had the same DNA as the early Nightingale files, a world-changing idea born in obscurity. I called Maya to my office. She was a young woman in her mid-20s, clearly terrified to be on the 50th floor. She sat on the edge of her chair, clutching her notes. I told her how brilliant her proposal was. I asked her when she planned to present it to her department head. She flinched. I don't know, Miss Sharma, she stammered. My manager, he doesn't really like new ideas that aren't his own. I'm afraid he'll either dismiss it or take credit for it. Her words struck me like a physical blow. Right there in my office was the ghost of my former self. The same fear, the same brilliance, the same broken system threatening to stifle it. I had vanquished Marcus Thorne, but 100 other, smaller Marcuses still roamed the halls of this company. It was then I realized what my true work as Chief Innovation Officer had to be. It wasn't just about creating the next Nightingale. It was about creating a system where the next Anya Sharma wouldn't need to commit corporate terrorism to be heard. That afternoon, I went to Elizabeth Caldwell's office with a new proposal. It had nothing to do with technology. It was about people. I want to create an internal innovation lab, I said, laying out my plan. We'll call it the Nightingale Incubator. It will be a separate semi-autonomous division under my office. Any employee, from a mailroom clerk to a senior VP, can submit an idea directly to the incubator, bypassing their direct managers and the entire corporate hierarchy. I continued, my voice gaining passion. If my team and I determine an idea has merit, we don't just buy the idea. We bring the employee into the incubator. We give them a budget, a team, and mentorship from my division. We give them the resources to build their own idea and the guarantee that they will retain full credit for its creation and success. We will create a safe harbor for innovation. We will mine the brilliant ideas that are currently being buried alive by middle management. Elizabeth listened, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she was silent for a long time. You're talking about a cultural revolution, Anya, she said finally. You're proposing a system that completely subverts the chain of command. The VPs will hate it. They'll see it as a threat to their authority. Good, I said. Their authority shouldn't be based on gatekeeping good ideas. It should be based on fostering them. This will force them to adapt, or it will expose them as roadblocks. Elizabeth stared at me, a long, calculating look. I saw the conflict in her eyes. She was a product of the old system, the one that had made her CEO, but she was also a pragmatist who couldn't deny the logic of my proposal. She knew how many brilliant ideas, how much potential profit, was likely being suffocated by the company's bureaucracy. This is a bigger gamble than Nightingale, she said. You're not betting on an algorithm, you're betting on people. And people are messy, they're political. She stood up and walked to her window. But this company needs to evolve or it will die. You have my approval. But know this, if it works, you will have reshaped the future of this company. If it fails, the old guard will crucify you. There will be no middle ground. The resistance was immediate and quiet, like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Managers forgot to forward the company-wide announcement about the incubator. VPs warned their teams that working on an incubator project was a risky sidetrack from the traditional path to promotion. The program was starved of oxygen, choked by the very bureaucracy it was designed to circumvent. For the first few months, the submissions were sparse and weak. The old guard was strangling my new idea in its crib. I realized I couldn't win with a top-down mandate. I had to create a success story so powerful it would be impossible to ignore. I went back to Maya, the young analyst with the risk assessment tool. I personally recruited her to be the incubator's inaugural fellow. I gave her a small team from my own division, a generous budget, and my undivided attention. We worked in secret, a skunkworks project hidden in plain sight. 6 months later, at the annual shareholders meeting, Elizabeth Caldwell ceded 5 minutes of her keynote time to me. But when I got to the podium, I didn't talk. I introduced Maya. Maya walked onto that stage, terrified but resolute. And for the next 5 minutes, she held a room of jaded investors and executives in the palm of her hand. She presented her project, Project Sentinel, with the same passion and brilliance she had shown me in my office. She demonstrated how her tool could have predicted and prevented a recent costly market collapse in Brazil that had cost the company nearly $1 billion. She wasn't just presenting an idea. She was presenting a $1 billion solution. When she finished, the room was silent. Then a senior board member stood up and started clapping. Soon, the entire room was on its feet in a standing ovation. The success was undeniable. It was a public triumph. That day, the floodgates opened. My office was inundated with submissions for the Nightingale Incubator. Brilliant, innovative, game-changing ideas were pouring in from every corner of the company. The managers who had tried to stifle the program were now scrambling to encourage their employees to participate, hoping to ride the coattails of the incubator's success. A year later, the Nightingale Incubator wasn't just a program. It was the most dynamic and profitable division of Sterling Galt. It had become the heart of the company, a vibrant ecosystem of creativity and ambition. I had my own floor now, a wide-open space with whiteboards for walls, where teams collaborated in a noisy, beautiful chaos. One afternoon, I was walking through the lab. I saw Maya, now a confident project director, leaning over a desk and talking to a new incubator fellow, a kid from the mailroom who had an idea for optimizing our logistics network. She was mentoring him, guiding him, asking him the same tough, insightful questions I had once asked her. The cycle was continuing without me. I walked back to my office and looked out the window. The view was the same, but the company below me was different. It was being transformed from the inside out. I realized my greatest achievement wasn't Project Nightingale. It wasn't the takedown of Marcus Thorne or the defeat of Argent Capital. It was this humming, thriving ecosystem of ideas. A culture where the best idea could win, no matter who it came from. I had started my journey fighting to protect my own creation. I was ending it by creating a world where ideas like mine no longer needed protection. I had won the game, yes. But my real victory was in finally changing the rules for everyone. The work was done. The masterpiece was complete.